In this video, I'm going to give you a basic overview of weeds in the lawn. I'm going to talk to you about a lot of the differences so that give you an understanding of what the weeds are, what type of weeds they are, and maybe a little bit of information about how to control the weeds in your yard. Let's get started right now. So my daughter was writing a research paper on weeds, and she called me out there as one of her sources. So we walked around in the yard. I was showing her different kind of weeds. And I thought, you know what, I think a lot of people might find this information helpful. So I was explaining to my daughter, I said, you know, if you go to the store and you go buy flowers, oftentimes you're going to see some that say annual flowers and some that are going to say perennial flowers. The perennial flowers tend to come back year after year. The annual flowers tend to not come back year after year. I said the same is true with weeds. So for instance, let me give you an example. You see this? This is crabgrass in the lawn. Crabgrass is an annual weed, so this particular crabgrass plant, or plants, there's a lot of them here, is going to die completely dead at the end of the year. When it gets cold, this plant will die. But it's going to drop seeds on the ground that are going to try to regrow the next year, germinate in your soil and form a whole new plant with a new root system, and that is an annual weed. Oftentimes we contrast that with a perennial weed. So when people a lot of times think they've got crabgrass in their lawn, I go out there and look at it and maybe it's filled with Dallas grass. And Dallas grass is a perennial weed, meaning that it is growing back every year from that same root ball. It's not forming a new plant like the crabgrass. It's going to come back the next spring and start putting out new green leaves from the same plant. The same root ball is coming back alive. It never died, okay, but it may have just went dormant for a little bit. Vast difference between the annual and perennial weeds. Now, why is that important? Well, from a weed control standpoint, a pre-emergent put down before an annual weed starts to germinate, the seeds start to germinate, is a very effective way to control those weeds. Where on perennial weeds, that's not doing you a whole lot of good. The plant is already alive, it's already established. You're not going to kill it with a pre-emergent application. You need to use post-emergent applications on those perennial weeds. So as I talked with my daughter, that was one differentiation we made. The other thing I talked to her about was that, hey, from a lawn care perspective, we often make a differentiation between grassy weeds, broadleaf weeds, and sedges. So let's take a look at some examples. I showed her this area and we look and you see here, it's obviously a grassy weed, okay? It's a grass versus the broadleaf weeds that you see here. Some common grassy weeds that we're gonna see are crabgrass. This is goosegrass. This is carpet grass. This is annual foxtail. You can see it's trying to put up a little foxtail seed head there. And I think this is some type of paspalum, but I'm not 100% sure. If you wanna leave a comment, there's the seed head. Leave a comment and let me know what you think that one is. Now let me show you some of the broadleaf weeds that are common in my area. Let me show you some of the broadleaf weeds that are common in my area. This is spurge. That's yellow wood sorrel or oxalis. That's Virginia buttonweed. It's a vine, low growing vine that has these white flowers on it as it gets to a mature state. This is lespedeza, and this is chamber bitter. We also talked about sedges, and one way you can identify sedges is they should have a triangular base to them. So let me see if I can show you that. We're going to look at purple nut sedge, yellow nut sedge, as well as kalinga. Now sedges like wet areas in the lawn. You see this nut sedge here. Let's see if I can find some that has a triangular base. And it may be a little bit hard to tell on the video, but if you get down to the very base of it, that is three-sided. I can feel it with my fingers. But that's one way to identify a sedge. My daughter said, well, that looks like a grassy weed to me. I said, well, I understand that, but it's its own category, sedges. I didn't want to confuse her and tell her that broom sedge, which is a common weed that we see sometimes, is technically not a sedge. Now that's some bad naming, if you ask me. Now typically, your purple nut sedge is going to grow a little flatter to the ground, have a slightly duller point on it at the end of the plant, and a darker color leaf, compared with the yellow nut sedge, which is taller, has a finer point. You can see a needle-like point there, and a lighter color leaf. Now sedges are terrible, they're difficult to control, but one thing you can do is quit watering your lawn so much. If you got an area that doesn't drain well, it's likely that you're going to have a lot of sedges in that area. We often recommend that people just water the lawn once a week and soak it really good, people that water multiple times a week are more likely to have sedge problems. And another type of sedge is Kalinga. So you see this here, it has the little spiky ball on top, but again, if you pull that plant up, should have a triangular base to it. And Kalinga is fairly easy to differentiate between nut sedge. Now there's some nut sedge products that work good on yellow nut sedge and Kalinga, such as your Dismiss product's going to give you a burn down on those, but not quite as good on the purple nut sedge. There's also some products that'll work pretty well on yellow and purple nut sedge, but not so good on Kalinga. I would put Pro Sedge and Sedgehammer in that category. Seem to do pretty well on yellow and purple nut sedge, not so great on Kalinga. And then there's some products that'll do pretty good on all of them, like Certainty, Solero, or some products that'll work on Kalinga and yellow and purple nut sedge. They're going to be a little bit more expensive products. Whatever product you use, sedges are difficult to control in the lawn. And the last thing I talked to my daughter about was cool season weeds versus warm season weeds. So I showed her all these weeds and I said these are all pretty much warm season weeds. We're in the summertime, and these weeds, when we get close to winter, are going to start dying. When you get that first frost, it's going to zap a lot of them. Some of them even die before it gets freezing weather. But if it's an annual weed like we talked about, they're going to drop seeds in the ground, and the next spring they're going to try to germinate again from those seeds. These weeds may have started germinating late last winter or in the spring, and you're seeing them now in the lawn, and they will die out when it gets cold weather. One of the crazy things though, it's almost perfect timing. As soon as these weeds are going away, guess what? The cool season weeds are just now starting to germinate. So when we start getting those cool nights in the fall, then your cool season weeds, the henbit, the poa annua, purple dead nettle, same ones I see year after year, those are starting to germinate, and they will live until it starts getting hot in the springtime, and the heat will kill them off. So what we do from a lawn care perspective, we try to put a pre-emergent application out before the weeds germinate, both in the cool season weeds and the warm season weeds. So for the warm season weeds, in my area, I'm around Birmingham, Alabama, we put out that pre-emergent January, February, try to get ahead of these warm season weeds. And then we spray it in September on into October before we start getting those cool nights to try to get ahead of those cool season weeds with your pre-emergent. Now, we're oftentimes mixing in a post-emergence with the pre-emergents to try to get better control if some have already germinated, or maybe the pre-emergent doesn't get them. Obviously following up with more post-emergent applications if some weeds happen to break through the cracks of the pre-emergent, which does happen, by the way. I hope you found this information helpful. Please leave me a comment. Please subscribe to the channel. I've got about 1,000 videos on the channel. I've been on here for about 11 years. I've been doing this for quite a while. I also run a weed control and fertilization business. If you are looking to get into weed control and fertilization, or even mowing or mosquito spraying, there's resources at lawncarelife.com, including video courses, programs, pricing charts, letters, documents, all kind of stuff. I really appreciate you watching the video. If you want to click my channel name, you're going to find a ton of videos that you can watch. We'll see you guys in the next video.